When my wife passed away, I kept secret the inheritance of $17 million, and also the beachfront estate in the Hamptons that was registered under my name. Upon returning from the funeral, my son-in-law threw my belongings into the garage. "Now you're going to sleep on a cot in the basement." I simply nodded. Then I decided to do something that brings me joy to share with you. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you're watching me. That way I can see how far my story has reached. My name is William, and I'm 62 years old. I never imagined that the most painful day of my life would also become the day I discovered who my family truly was. It was a cold Tuesday morning in November when we buried Margaret. 38 years of marriage disappeared beneath that bitter wind that seemed to mock my grief. Throughout the entire ceremony, I maintained the composure that Margaret would have expected from me. I greeted the mourners, accepted condolences, and held my grandchildren's hands when they cried for their grandmother. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, stayed close to me during the funeral, but not for support. Her calculating eyes constantly scanned the attendees, as if she were cataloging who might be useful to her in the future. When the minister mentioned Margaret's generosity toward her family, I saw how her jaw tightened. David, my son, seemed lost in his own world of sorrow, oblivious to his wife's scheming. The ride home was silent. I sat in the back seat of David's BMW, watching the streets of Denver pass by, streets that had been my home for decades. Rebecca drove with cold efficiency, her perfectly manicured nails occasionally tapping against the steering wheel. From time to time, she exchanged meaningful glances with David through the rearview mirror. When we arrived at the house, a beautiful two-story property in Cherry Hills Village that Margaret and I had purchased 18 years ago, I noticed something strange. My suitcases were stacked by the garage door. At first, I thought someone had moved them by mistake during the funeral preparations. "What are my things doing here?" I asked, pointing to the two worn leather cases that contained the little I had packed to stay with them for a few days after the funeral. Rebecca stopped abruptly, turning toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, William, I thought it was obvious. Now that Margaret isn't here, things are going to change a bit around here." David seemed uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze while nervously fidgeting. "Dad, it's just that Rebecca and I have been talking, and what David is trying to say," Rebecca interrupted, her voice taking on a condescending tone, "is that now that we're responsible for you, we need to establish some ground rules. This house is very large, and frankly, maintaining it requires a lot of money." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "Responsible for me? Rebecca, this is my house. Margaret and I. It was your house." She cut me off sharply. "But Margaret is gone now. And according to the will we read with the lawyer, everything passes to David as the only child. We're the owners now." The lie rolled off her tongue with an ease that left me frozen. I had been present when Margaret drafted her will. I knew exactly what it said, but apparently Rebecca had constructed a completely different version for David. "Rebecca, I think there's a misunderstanding," I began to say, but she raised a hand to silence me. "There's no misunderstanding, William. Look, we understand this must be difficult for you. Margaret supported you all these years, and now that she's gone, obviously you have nowhere to go or any way to support yourself. That's why David and I have decided you can stay." The way she said stay sounded more like a sentence than a generous offer, but she continued, gesturing toward my suitcases. "You'll have to stay here in the basement room next to the utility area. The master bedroom is now ours, and the children need their own spaces. We hope you understand." David finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Dad, it'll be temporary, just until we get organized." I looked at the room they were referring to. It was small, damp, and had been used primarily for storage. It had a rusty single bed and a small window that looked directly onto the back alley, where garbage trucks made noise every dawn. "And naturally," Rebecca added, examining her nails, "we'll expect you to contribute to the household. It's not fair for David to carry all the expenses of supporting you. You can help with cleaning, cooking, watching the kids when we need it. You know, earn your place here." The humiliation was complete. In the span of an afternoon, I had gone from being the man of the house to being treated like an unpaid domestic worker. My own grandchildren, Sophie, 13, and Jake, 11, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity that broke my heart. That night, as I unpacked my belongings in that depressing room, I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I wept. I didn't cry just for her, but for the realization that the family I had sacrificed so much for saw me as a burden. What Rebecca and David didn't know was that Margaret had been very careful with her finances. The last 6 years of her life, she had worked tirelessly to secure my future, knowing that her health was declining. There were accounts in my name, properties that only I knew about. And yes, there was a beachfront estate in the Hamptons that she had purchased as a surprise gift for our 35th anniversary. She never got to tell me about it. I found the papers among her personal documents a week before the funeral. But that night, with the sound of Rebecca laughing loudly in my bedroom and David doing nothing to defend me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to let them believe they had control. I was going to let them treat me however they wanted. And when the exact moment arrived, I would show them exactly who had the real power in this situation. The first 4 months after the funeral were the most humiliating of my life, but also the most revealing. Each day that passed, Rebecca showed more clearly who she really was. And I became the silent observer of my own degradation. My routine began at 5 in the morning. The basement room was freezing in winter and stifling in summer, with no thermostat of its own. I would wake up before everyone else to prepare breakfast for the family. Rebecca had made it very clear that if I wanted to earn my place in the house, I had to prove my usefulness. William, she would tell me every morning as she came down the stairs in her expensive silk robe, make sure the coffee is ready by 7 sharp. And David wants his eggs Benedict, not scrambled. The children need packed lunches, and I have that parent-teacher conference, so I need you to iron my blue dress. Never please, never thank you. Just dry orders as if I were her personal servant. David had completely changed after his mother's death. Where before he had been a considerate man who at least acknowledged my efforts, now he avoided looking me in the eyes. When I tried to talk to him about the situation, he always had an excuse. "Dad, I'm very busy with work," he would say, checking his phone while I served him coffee. "Rebecca handles these household matters better. I trust her judgment." Her judgment. Her judgment was to treat me as if I were invisible. One morning, while cleaning the living room, I heard Rebecca talking on the phone with her sister Diane. She was standing by the window with a coffee cup in her hand, coffee that I had prepared, complaining about her burden. "It's so annoying, Diane. The old man is here all the time, shuffling around the house like a depressed ghost. David feels guilty, obviously, but I told him we have to be practical. We can't support one more person without them contributing something." She paused, laughing at something her sister had said. "That's the thing about elderly people. God, don't you know how expensive those places are? Besides, he cooks decently and keeps the house clean. It's basically having free domestic help. I just have to put up with his sad face from time to time." I stood paralyzed behind the door with the cleaning cloth clenched in my hands. Free domestic help. That's what I was to her. But what hurt me most was seeing how my grandchildren gradually began to treat me differently. Sophie, who had always been my shadow, now seemed embarrassed when her friends came to visit and saw me cleaning. "Grandpa," she whispered to me one day while I was folding laundry in the utility room, "why do you live in the small room now? Mom says it's because you can't afford your own house. How do you explain to a 13-year-old girl that her mother is lying? How do you tell her that the grandfather who used to take her shopping and on vacations is being treated like a servant in his own home?" "Things changed when your grandmother died, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But don't worry about me, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. Each day that passed, Rebecca became crueler and more brazen. She had started inviting her friends to lunch at the house, always asking me to serve the food and clean up afterward. "William, bring more champagne for the ladies," she would shout from the dining room, as if I were her serving staff. Her friends looked at me with that mixture of pity and superiority that I knew well. One afternoon, Brenda Morrison, one of her friends from the club, stopped me in the kitchen. "Excuse me, dear," she said with a condescending smile. "Could you bring me some more ice and maybe some extra napkins?" When I returned with what she had requested, I heard part of her conversation with Rebecca. "It's such a difficult situation, Becca, but I think you're handling this with such grace. Not all women would be so generous to care for their father-in-law like this." Rebecca sighed dramatically. "It's a sacrifice, Brenda, but David feels it's our Christian duty. Although, frankly, sometimes I wonder how much longer we can sustain this situation. The house is expensive to maintain, and now with an extra person. Have you thought about other options?" Brenda asked quietly. "Well," Rebecca lowered her voice, "there are some very nice senior living facilities here in Denver, places where he could have people his age, activities. It would actually be better for him." My blood ran cold. Not only did they want to humiliate me, but they were planning to get rid of me completely. That night, as I lay awake in that uncomfortable bed listening to the street noises, I made an important decision. I had been postponing something I knew I had to do. The next day, I would make a call I had been avoiding. Margaret had left everything very organized, but there were documents that only I could access, accounts that needed my signature, properties that required my attention. I had been so overwhelmed by grief, and then by the situation at home, that I had left everything in the hands of the estate executor. But it was time for William Torres to stop being the victim and become who he really was, a man with resources, dignity, and options. Rebecca had made a mistake by underestimating me. She thought she knew the whole story, but the truth was much more complex than her small mind could imagine. The next day, I would begin planning my liberation. But I would do it so quietly and carefully that no one would suspect anything until it was too late to stop me. The call that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning while Rebecca had gone to the spa and David was at work. The children were at school, so I had the house to myself for the first time in months. Mr. Torres, the voice of Fernando Alvarez, Margaret's lawyer, sounded surprised to hear my voice. "I've been waiting for your call. It's been 5 months since the funeral, and there are urgent matters that require your immediate attention." I sat on the edge of my narrow bed with my hands trembling slightly. "Fernando, I've been processing everything. My family told me that the will left everything to David." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Fernando cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sir, I think we need to talk in person. There's very important information you need to know, and it's not appropriate to discuss it over the phone. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" That afternoon, while Rebecca thought I was at the grocery store buying ingredients for dinner, I sat across from Fernando's mahogany desk in his office in the financial district. The documents he showed me left me breathless. Margaret had not only left me well cared for, she had made me a very wealthy man. "Your wife was extremely meticulous," Fernando explained, showing me document after document. "The Cherry Hills house is completely paid off and is in a joint trust that includes your name. David has residency rights while you live, but the property is yours." My eyes filled with tears. So why does Rebecca say that? Because David probably didn't fully understand the terms when he read a preliminary copy. Fernando shook his head. Margaret was very specific. She wanted to ensure you would never be vulnerable or dependent on anyone. Fernando continued explaining. There were bank accounts in my name worth several $1,000,000. There were real estate investments, stocks, bonds. And then came the biggest surprise of all. "The property in the Hamptons," Fernando said, sliding a thick folder toward me. "Your wife bought it 2 years ago as a surprise gift. It's a beachfront estate, fully furnished, with maintenance staff. She wanted to take you there for your 35th anniversary. The photograph showed me a dream house. White walls, high ceilings, enormous windows overlooking the turquoise ocean. It was larger and more beautiful than the Denver house. Margaret had spent a fortune on it. "How much is all this worth?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Conservatively, between the property's investments and bank accounts, you're looking at close to $17 million, Mr. Torres." I sat in silence, processing the information. $17 million. While I slept in a servant's room and cooked like a servant, I owned $17 million. Why didn't Margaret ever tell me anything? Fernando smiled sadly. She said she wanted it to be a surprise for when she was no longer here. She wanted to make sure you had the freedom to do exactly what you wanted with your life without depending on anyone. I returned home that afternoon, with my mind spinning. Rebecca was in the kitchen reviewing bills with a worried expression. "Where were you?" she asked brusquely. "You were supposed to go to the grocery store. You don't have anything in the bags." "I had to run some errands," I lied, heading toward my room. "Well, I hope you brought something for dinner because we have guests tonight. David's boss is coming with his wife, and I need everything to be perfect." That night, as I served canapés to Rebecca's guests and listened to her boast about her house and lifestyle, a strange calm came over me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt powerful. During the next 2 weeks, I began to observe Rebecca more carefully. Her habits, her routines, her secrets. And that's when I discovered something that would change everything. It was a Friday afternoon. Rebecca had said she was going to her yoga class, but something in her behavior seemed suspicious to me. The way she had dressed up more than usual, the extra perfume, the secret smile. On impulse, I decided to follow her. I saw her drive not toward the yoga studio, but toward the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. My heart raced as I watched her enter the lobby confidently. I waited a few minutes, then entered myself. I immediately spotted her sitting at the hotel bar, with a man who definitely wasn't David. He was younger, well-dressed, and the way they touched left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I hid behind a column and watched them for half an hour. I saw him hand her something that looked like documents. I saw her review them carefully, nodding. I saw how they kissed before separating. That night, Rebecca came home from yoga with a satisfied smile, telling David about her excellent relaxation session. Over the following days, I began paying attention to other details. Rebecca's whispered phone calls that she ended abruptly when someone entered the room, the documents she kept in a small safe in her closet, the frequent outings for errands that lasted hours. One afternoon, while cleaning her room, I found something that confirmed my suspicions. She had left her laptop open, and on the screen was an open email. "My love," said the message from someone named Daniel Carrera. "The divorce papers are almost ready. We just need to wait a little longer to be sure about the inheritance. Once we're clear about how much money there really is, we can proceed. David doesn't suspect anything, does he?" My blood froze. Rebecca wasn't just humiliating me and planning to put me in a nursing home. She was planning to divorce David and take what she believed was his inheritance. I quickly took photos of the email with my phone, my heart beating so loud I was afraid someone would hear it. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed, the puzzle pieces began to fit together. Rebecca had orchestrated everything from the beginning: the humiliation, the cruel treatment, the plans to send me to a nursing home. It was all part of her strategy to keep me away, while she manipulated David, and planned her escape with the fortune she thought he had inherited. But Rebecca had made a fatal mistake. She had completely underestimated the wrong man. The next day, I made another appointment with Fernando. It was time to begin my own plan, and this time I wasn't going to be anyone's victim. What happened on Thursday morning was like a bomb that exploded in the middle of the charade we had been living for months. David came home early from work, something he never did, and his face had an expression I had never seen before. He looked somewhere between confused and furious. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch as always when I heard him shouting from Margaret's office. "Rebecca, come here right now, come here." Rebecca, who was upstairs getting ready for another of her mysterious outings, came running down the stairs. "What's wrong, honey? Why are you shouting? What is this?" David had a stack of documents in his hand, and his voice trembled with anger. From the kitchen, I could see how Rebecca instantly paled when she saw the papers. "David, can I explain?" "Explain what?" "That you've been lying to me for months? That my father isn't a burden we have to support, but that he's a millionaire?" The silence that followed was deafening. I dropped the knife I had in my hand, and the sound of metal against the marble floor echoed throughout the house. David continued, his voice getting louder. "I found these documents in Mom's desk. Did you know that Dad owns this house? Did you know he has bank accounts I can't even calculate? Did you know he has an estate in the Hamptons? Rebecca tried to regain her composure. David, honey, obviously there are some things we didn't understand well when— No, David shouted, throwing the documents into the air. There are no misunderstandings. It says clearly here that my father inherited millions of dollars, and you made me believe he was a poor widower we had to support. At that moment, I knew my charade was over. I walked slowly toward the living room, drying my hands with my apron. David looked at me with an expression of pain and shame that broke my heart. Dad, is it true? You have money? All this time you've had money? Before I could answer, Rebecca intervened desperately. David, she deceived us. She made us believe she needed help when in reality— I deceived you, I said. For the first time in months, my voice came out strong and clear. Rebecca, you told me this house was now yours. You told me David had inherited everything. You made me sleep in the servants' room. David sat heavily on the sofa, putting his head in his hands. My God, what have we done? What you did, I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was beating 1,000 times a minute, was show me exactly who you are when you think you have power over someone. Rebecca, realizing her world was crumbling, attacked desperately. You manipulated us. You let us treat you like that knowing you had millions. You're a cruel and calculating man. The irony of her words would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. David lifted his head, looking at me with eyes full of tears. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us treat you like that? The question hurt me more than all the months of humiliation combined, because my own son, my only real family, had participated in my degradation. Because I needed to know, I finally replied. I needed to know how you were going to treat me when you thought I had nothing. I needed to know if the love you professed was real, or if it was just convenient. Rebecca turned to David, her eyes shining with panic. David, you can't believe this. He's trying to manipulate you. We're your family, we're your priorities. But David was no longer listening to her. He stood up and walked toward me. Dad, I don't know what to say. I feel so ashamed. Mom must be rolling in her grave. Your mother, I said softly, knew exactly what she was doing when she structured her will that way. She protected me, David. She made sure I would never have to depend on anyone. Rebecca, seeing she was losing control of the situation, played her last card. David, remember everything we've built together. Think about the children. Are you going to destroy our family over this? That's when I decided it was time to reveal the other truth I had been keeping. Speaking of destroying families, I said, taking out my phone. I think there's something else David should know. The color completely drained from Rebecca's face. William, don't you dare. I showed the photos I had taken of the emails, the images of her with Daniel Carrera at the hotel. Do you want to tell David about your boyfriend, or should I? The silence that followed was absolute. David took my phone with trembling hands, reading the messages, seeing the photos. When he looked up, the expression on his face was one of pure horror. Daniel Carrera, the real estate broker. Rebecca, have you been all this time? Rebecca began to sob, but they were tears of desperation, not remorse. David, I can explain everything. He was just helping me with some legal matters like divorce papers. Rebecca's mask finally fell completely. Her face contorted into an expression of pure hatred. Yes, divorce papers. Because I'm sick of living a lie. I'm sick of pretending I love you when you're a weak man who lets his daddy control him. David stepped back as if he'd been hit. What? Your precious daddy has been playing with all of us, Rebecca screamed, all pretense of tears gone. He knew all along he had money. He let us humiliate him because he wanted to have something against us. He's a manipulator. No, I said calmly. I'm a man who learned the truth about the people I thought loved me. David looked between the two women in his life, and for the first time, I saw my son really see who his wife was. Get out of my house, he told Rebecca, his voice barely a whisper. Your house? Rebecca laughed bitterly. It's not your house, idiot. It's his. It's always been his. And now that everyone knows, I don't have to pretend I care about you anymore. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned to me with a venomous smile. "Congratulations, William. You won. But you lost your son in the process, because he's never going to forgive you for making him go through this." The door closed behind her, leaving David and me alone in the most uncomfortable silence we had ever shared. The days after Rebecca left were strange and tense. David had temporarily moved to the guest room, and I had returned to the master bedroom, my master bedroom. But the house felt like a battlefield where no one knew exactly where the lines were drawn. David barely spoke to me, not out of anger, but out of shame. I could see him struggling with guilt every time our eyes met. The children, confused by their mother's sudden disappearance, asked questions that neither of us knew how to answer. "Grandpa, why did Mom leave?" Sophie asked me one night while I helped her with her homework. "Sometimes adults need time to think about important things," I replied, not knowing what else to say. "But is she coming back?" The question hurt me because I knew that, regardless of my feelings toward Rebecca, these children loved her and didn't deserve to suffer for their mother's actions. It was Jake who, with the brutal honesty of an 11-year-old, asked me the question that broke my heart. "Grandpa, Dad says you have a lot of money now. Does that mean you're not going to live in the small room anymore?" David, who had been listening from the doorway, entered with red eyes. "Jake, go to your room, please. I need to talk to Grandpa." When we were alone, David finally broke down. "Dad, I don't know how to ask for your forgiveness for this. I don't know how to live with myself knowing what I put you through." I sat next to him on the sofa, the same sofa where Margaret and I had watched David grow up, where we had celebrated his successes and comforted his failures. "David, what I need you to understand is that I chose to stay silent. I could have stopped everything at any moment, but why didn't you? Why did you let us treat you like a servant when you had millions in the bank?" The answer was complex, painful, and I knew he wasn't ready to hear all of it. But he deserved an explanation. "Because I needed to know if you loved me for myself, or if you loved me because it was convenient. I needed to know if you respected the man who raised you, or if you only respected what I could do for you." David covered his face with his hands. "I failed the test, didn't I?" "You didn't fail it, son. You learned from it. There's a difference. Over the next few weeks, we tried to establish a new normalcy. David was seeing a therapist, trying to process not only Rebecca's betrayal, but his own role in my humiliation. The children were slowly adapting to the idea that their parents weren't going to reconcile. But Rebecca wasn't done with us. The first sign was when the children returned from their weekend visit with her, quieter than usual. Sophie had swollen eyes as if she had been crying, and Jake didn't want to tell me about his time with his mother. It was David who finally told me what had happened. "She's telling them that you destroyed our family," he said, his voice full of contained anger. "She's telling them you could have prevented the divorce if you had been honest from the beginning." Rebecca's manipulation hadn't ended. Now she was using my grandchildren as emotional weapons. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca showed up at the door without warning, but this time she didn't come alone. She brought Daniel Carrera with her, and both had a folder of legal documents. "William," Rebecca said with a fake smile, "we need to talk." David wasn't home, and the children were at school. It was just me against the two of them, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel intimidated. "Come in," I said, opening the door. "This should be interesting." They sat in my living room as if they owned the place. Daniel, a man in his 40s with overly styled hair and a salesman's smile, opened his briefcase. "Mr. Torres," he began, "we've come to make you an offer we hope you'll consider carefully." "An offer?" Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with what she interpreted as one last chance at victory. "Look, William, I know things between us didn't end well, but we have to think about the children. They need stability. They need their two parents together. And," Daniel continued, "we've developed a proposal we believe would benefit everyone. Rebecca is willing to return to David and rebuild the family, but we need certain guarantees." He slid a document toward me. It was an agreement where I committed to transferring a significant amount of money, $5 million, to a joint account controlled by David and Rebecca. In exchange, Rebecca would come home and forgive past transgressions. The audacity left me speechless for a moment. "Are you blackmailing me?" I finally asked. "It's not blackmail," Rebecca replied sweetly. "It's an investment in your family's happiness. Think about it, William. The children would have their parents together. David would be happy, and you would have your family intact. Isn't that worth $5 million? And if I don't accept?" Daniel and Rebecca exchanged a significant look. "Well," Daniel said softly, "then we would have to explore other legal options. We could question the mental competence you had when you allowed yourself to be treated so badly while having resources available. We could suggest there are reasons to be concerned about your ability to make financial decisions." The threat was clear. If I didn't give them money voluntarily, they would try to take it from me legally by questioning my sanity. Rebecca smiled, believing they had me cornered. "Also," she added casually, "the children have expressed a lot of confusion about this whole situation. It would be terrible if they had to testify about their grandfather's erratic behavior in court." There was the final threat, using my grandchildren against me. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked at the garden that Margaret and I had cultivated together for decades. "You know what's the saddest thing about all this?" I said finally, without turning toward them. "What?" Rebecca asked, her voice tense. "That you think you know me." I turned toward them, and something in my expression made Daniel shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Rebecca, during all these months you humiliated me, treated me like a servant, planned to put me in a nursing home to keep money that was never yours. Do you know what I was doing?" She looked at me with suspicion. "I was learning exactly who you are. And Daniel," I turned to him, "do you think I don't know you have gambling debts of more than $300,000? Do you think I don't know this isn't the first time you've tried to scam an elderly widower?" Daniel's face paled. "So here's my offer," I continued, my voice taking on a steel tone. "You're going to leave my house right now. Rebecca is going to sign the divorce papers without asking for a penny, and both of you are going to disappear from our lives forever." "Or what?" Rebecca jumped up, her mask falling once again. I smiled, a smile that would have made Margaret proud. "Or I show the appropriate authorities all the evidence I've compiled about your fraudulent activities, Rebecca. And Daniel, I show your wife, yes, I know you're married, all the photos of your affairs with married women." The silence that followed was absolute. "You played with the wrong man," I said softly. "Now get out of my house." 6 months after that day, I'm sitting on the terrace of my house in the Hamptons watching the sun set over the Atlantic. The water is such a perfect blue it seems unreal, and the warm breeze carries the scent of jasmine growing in my garden. Margaret was right. This place is paradise. The transition wasn't immediate or easy. After Rebecca and Daniel left my house that afternoon with their tails between their legs and their plans in ruins, I had to make the most difficult decisions of my life. David divorced Rebecca within 2 months. She didn't fight it. She had no choice after the evidence of her infidelity and fraud plans came to light. The process was clean and quick, exactly as I had planned. The children were the hardest part. Sophie and Jake deserved an explanation they could understand, one that didn't turn their mother into a complete villain, but also didn't minimize the truth. Adults sometimes make bad decisions when they're scared or confused. I told them one afternoon while we baked cookies together in my kitchen. "Your mom made some choices that hurt the family, and now she has to learn to live with the consequences. But can we still love her?" Jake asked with that simple wisdom children have. "Of course you can," I replied, hugging him tight. "Love doesn't turn off just because someone makes mistakes, but love also means protecting ourselves from people who hurt us repeatedly." David struggled more than the children. Guilt was consuming him, and for weeks he begged me to stay in Denver. "Dad, let me make up for everything. Let me take care of you like I should have from the beginning." One night, while we were having dinner alone after the children had gone to bed, we finally had the conversation we had both been avoiding. "Do you forgive me?" he asked with tears in his eyes. "David," I said, taking his hand, "there's nothing to forgive. You were manipulated by a woman who knew exactly how to control your emotions. What matters now is that you learned who you really are when faced with difficult decisions. But I hurt you. I humiliated you. You treated me the way Rebecca taught you to treat me, and when you knew the truth, you immediately wanted to repair the damage. That tells me everything I need to know about the man you are. But despite the forgiveness, despite the renewed love between us, I knew I had to leave. Denver was full of painful memories, and I needed a fresh start. More importantly, I needed David to learn to be independent, to make his own decisions without the influence of a strong woman, neither his mother nor his ex-wife. "Why the Hamptons?" he asked when I told him my plans. I showed him the photos of the house Margaret had bought for us, because your mother wanted me to be free to choose my own adventure, and this is my choice. David smiled for the first time in weeks. Mom was always smarter than the rest of us, wasn't she? We established a plan. David and the children would visit me during summer vacations and Christmas holidays. I would return to Denver for their birthdays and important events. We would have weekly video calls, but mainly we would live our own lives. Before I left, there was one last matter to attend to. I established an educational trust for Sophie and Jake. When they turned 18, they would have access to funds for college and to establish themselves in adult life. But the money would come with conditions. They had to maintain good grades, do community service, and most importantly, write annual letters reflecting on the lessons they had learned from this family experience. For David, I transferred the Denver house completely to his name, along with a fund sufficient to maintain it and raise the children comfortably. I didn't want him to feel dependent on me, but I also didn't want him to struggle financially as a single father. "It's too much, Dad," he protested when he saw the documents. "It's not too much. It's exactly what your mother would have wanted." The day I left Denver, David and the children took me to the airport. There were no dramatic tears or heartbreaking goodbyes. There was a peace in all of us that we hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to miss you, Grandpa," Sophie told me, hugging me tight. "I'm going to miss you too, sweetheart. But now we have something to look forward to, your beach vacations." Jake handed me a letter he had written. "So you don't forget us," he said seriously. I opened it when the plane took off. In his childish handwriting he had written, "Dear Grandpa, thank you for teaching us that strong people are those who help others, not those who hurt them. We love you." Now 6 months later, my life has a completely different rhythm. I wake up when I want to, not because someone else needs breakfast. I walk on the beach every morning, something I could never do when I was constantly serving others. I've started taking painting classes, something I had wanted to do for decades but never had time for. My house is full of life in ways I never expected. Maria and Carlos, the couple who maintain the property, have become dear friends. Their grandchildren come to visit me on weekends, and I teach them English while they teach me better Spanish. I've begun doing volunteer work at the local hospital, helping translate for American tourists who need medical care. It's rewarding to use my life experience to help others, but on my own terms. David calls me every Sunday, and our conversations are now real, honest. He tells me about his dates. He's started dating again, very cautiously, and about the children's achievements. I tell him about my adventures, my new friends, my plans for the future. "Dad," he told me last week, "you sound so happy." I am, son. For the first time in years, I am. Rebecca tried to contact me once, about 3 months after I moved. The text message was predictable, a mixture of self-pity and one last attempt at manipulation. It said she had reflected on her mistakes and wanted to make peace for the children's sake. I deleted it without responding. Some people don't deserve second chances, especially when they already wasted so many first chances. Rebecca had repeatedly shown who she was when she thought she had power. That information was all I needed to know about her for the rest of my life. This morning, while drinking my coffee on the terrace, I thought about Margaret, about how she had planned my freedom so carefully, about how she had known, even without knowing the specific details, that I would need the financial strength to defend my dignity. "Thank you, my love," I said to the wind. "You knew exactly what you were doing. At 62 years old, I've learned something that took me decades to understand. True wealth isn't the money in the bank, though it certainly helps. True wealth is the freedom to choose how you want to live and whom you want to surround yourself with. I have both now, and for the first time in my life, no one, absolutely no one, can take them away from me. This afternoon, Sophie and Jake arrive for their spring break. We're going to build sandcastles, look for shells, and cook together in my kitchen. I'm going to teach them to sail in the small yacht I bought last month, and when they ask about their mother, as they inevitably will, I'll tell them the truth, that sometimes life teaches us difficult lessons about the people we love, but those lessons make us wiser and stronger. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. I have a dinner to prepare, a book to read, and a new life to live. Rebecca once told me I had won. She was right, but not in the way she thought. I won my freedom. I won my dignity. I won the wisdom of knowing exactly what I'm worth, and that, it turns out, is priceless. The months that followed were a revelation in ways I hadn't anticipated. Living in the Hamptons wasn't just about escaping the painful memories of Denver. It was about discovering who William Torres really was when he wasn't defined by other people's expectations or limitations. My daily routine became a meditation on freedom. I would wake up naturally, usually around 7, make my coffee and sit on the terrace watching the waves. The sound of the ocean had become my morning prayer, a reminder that life, like the tides, has its rhythms of retreat and advance. The painting classes turned into something more serious than I had expected. Professor Elena Vasquez, a renowned artist who taught at the local community center, saw something in my work that surprised even me. "William," she said one afternoon as I worked on a seascape, "you have an intuitive understanding of light and shadow that can't be taught. You should consider a small exhibition." An exhibition. At 62, I was discovering talents I never knew I had. Margaret would have been proud, I thought, adding another stroke of blue to capture the way the afternoon light danced on the water. The relationship with Maria and Carlos deepened beyond employer and employees. They became my chosen family, the people who saw me not as a wealthy man or a victim of family betrayal, but simply as William, their friend who loved their grandchildren's laughter and made terrible jokes in broken Spanish. One evening, as we shared dinner on my terrace, Carlos asked me something that made me think. "Señor William, do you ever regret the months you suffered in silence? Do you wish you had revealed the truth sooner?" I considered his question while watching 8-year-old Isabella chase fireflies in my garden. "No, Carlos. I needed to know who people really were. If I had revealed my wealth immediately, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if their love was genuine or purchased." Maria nodded wisely. "Sometimes," she said, "the most expensive lessons are the most valuable ones." The children's visits became the highlights of my year. Sophie, now 14, had developed a sharp intelligence that reminded me of Margaret. She asked direct questions about the divorce, about money, about the choices adults make. She deserved honest answers. "Grandpa," she said one morning as we walked along the beach, "do you think Dad is happier now?" I watched Jake ahead of us, chasing seagulls with the unbridled joy that only children possess. "I think your father is learning to be himself again," I replied. "Sometimes we need space to remember who we are, without other people telling us who we should be." David's evolution was perhaps the most gratifying to witness. During his visits, I could see him transforming from the insecure man who had allowed Rebecca to make decisions for him into someone who took responsibility for his own life. He had started a small consulting business, something he had always wanted to do, but Rebecca had discouraged. He was dating a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who treated my grandchildren with genuine affection and never asked about my money. "Dad," he said during his last visit, "I've been thinking about something. What's that? I want to apologize not just for how I treated you, but for the man I allowed myself to become. Rebecca didn't force me to be weak. She just made it easy." That recognition was worth more to me than all $17 million. The legal aftermath of Rebecca's schemes eventually caught up with her. Daniel Carrera was arrested for fraud involving 3 other elderly clients. Rebecca, facing potential criminal charges as an accomplice, fled to Mexico with what little money she had managed to secure. The children received occasional postcards from Cancun, but she made no attempt to maintain a real relationship with them. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only sadness for Sophie and Jake, who deserved a better mother. 1 year after moving to the Hamptons, I received an unexpected visitor. Fernando Alvarez, Margaret's lawyer, came to see me with news that would have shocked me a year earlier, but now seemed like the natural next step in Margaret's continued care for our family. "There's something else, Mr. Torres," he said, opening a final folder I had never seen. "Margaret left very specific instructions that I was only to share this with you after you had been living independently for 1 full year. The document revealed the existence of a charitable foundation that Margaret had established in our name, with an endowment of $5 million. The foundation was designed to help elderly people who were being financially abused by family members, providing them with legal resources and temporary housing. She wrote you a letter," Fernando said, handing me an envelope in Margaret's familiar handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest William, if you're reading this, it means you've successfully navigated the challenge I knew would come after my death. I know you well enough to know that you would want to help others facing similar situations. This foundation is my gift to your generous heart. Use it to help others reclaim their dignity, just as you reclaimed yours. All my love, Margaret." I sat in silence for a long time after Fernando left, holding Margaret's letter and watching the waves. Even in death, she continued to surprise me, to challenge me, to love me in ways that took my breath away. The Margaret Torres Foundation for Elder Financial Protection opened 6 months later. We've helped 47 people in our first year of operation, providing legal aid, temporary housing, and counseling services for elderly individuals being exploited by family members or caregivers. Each person we help reminds me of why I endured those months of humiliation. Every story validates Margaret's faith in my strength and her understanding of what I would need to heal not just myself, but others facing similar betrayals. Today marks the 2nd anniversary of Margaret's death. This morning I placed white roses on the small memorial garden I created for her here at the Hamptons house. The garden overlooks the ocean, surrounded by the jasmine she loved so much. Sophie and Jake, now 15 and 13, are spending the summer with me. They've invited 3 friends from school, and my house rings with teenage laughter and the sound of young people discovering that life can be joyful even after loss. David visits every few weeks, often bringing Sarah, who has become a beloved part of our family. They're talking about marriage, and this time I see the difference in my son's choice. He's chosen a partner who builds him up rather than tears him down, who sees his kindness as strength rather than weakness. This evening, as I watch the sunset paint the sky in magnificent colors, I think about the journey that brought me here. The humiliation, the betrayal, the moment of choosing between bitterness and wisdom, all of it led to this life of purpose and peace. Rebecca gave me an unexpected gift, though she'll never understand it. She showed me who I truly was when stripped of external validation, when reduced to my essence. She revealed my capacity for patience, for strategic thinking, for forgiveness without foolishness. In trying to destroy me, she freed me. Tomorrow, I begin work on my autobiography. The working title is The Art of Necessary Losses: How Betrayal Became My Liberation. My editor thinks it could help others facing similar family betrayals, and my therapist agrees that sharing the story might provide healing for people who feel trapped in toxic family dynamics. As I finish writing in my journal tonight, I'm filled not with anger or sadness about the past, but with gratitude for the present and excitement for the future. At 64 years old, I'm living the most authentic, purposeful life I've ever known. Margaret was right about everything. She knew I would need to be tested. She knew I would pass the test. And she knew that passing it would transform me from a man who lived for others' approval into someone who lived according to his own values and dreams. The foundation keeps growing. We're opening a second location in Florida next year. My paintings are being shown in a small gallery in East Hampton. Sophie is applying to colleges and wants to study psychology to help families in crisis. Jake has developed a passion for sailing and dreams of crossing the Atlantic someday. Life, I've learned, truly begins when you stop allowing other people to write your story. Tonight, as I sit in my beautiful home surrounded by people who love me for who I am rather than what I can provide, I'm grateful for every difficult lesson that led me here. Tomorrow brings new possibilities, new ways to help others, new adventures to explore. And for the first time in my life, I'm completely free to choose how I want to spend my remaining years. The boy who once lived in the basement room could never have imagined the man writing these words. But then again, transformation often comes disguised as disaster, and freedom often looks like loss until you're brave enough to embrace it. As Margaret always said, every ending is also a beginning. Tonight, I sleep peacefully, knowing that my story is far from over. In fact, the best chapters may still be waiting to be written.